Welcome to Know What I Mean. My name's George.
My name is Oskar. Yeah, so for this week's quote, I was really happy with the bases that we covered. It definitely felt like it tapped into our personal experiences. You know, often we can talk quite conceptually and have our various ideas about things, but I think we actually went into personal experience quite a lot in this one. And I always really appreciate doing that. So that was really nice.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. Yeah, so it's always interesting to get your perspective on it and to see different angles on the quote. Yeah, I think there was a lot of crossover in what we're thinking about here, which was nice because it all tied in and we were able to ask each other a few questions and delve into things that maybe we wouldn't have said ourselves organically. So I think that was a good part of the podcast as well. So hope you guys enjoy it, and let's get into the episode.
The quote for this week is by John Lennon, and it is, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans." Me and George established that we had actually recorded this quote previously, but it was one of the probably like the second or third episode that we recorded that didn't get released. I thought it was familiar when I was thinking about saying it, and I was like, have we? And then we had a little look back, and it hasn't actually been released before, but we have recorded it before. I'm intrigued how different the conversation will be after 6 months of recording. And I'm glancing over to the side today, which listeners won't see, but because I'm doing a canvas at the moment, and my notes are actually on this canvas. So it's slightly, I would usually have notes on my screen, but today it's on a canvas, so I'm looking to the right a little bit when reading. So that's why I'm doing that. I picked this quote because of my recent change in working situation from a kind of 9 to 5 to freelance. And it's not actually because I think that I'm totally just in the making other plans headspace at the moment. It's not just because I'm completely absorbed in that. It was more that I wanted to use this quote as a means to explore to what degree I'm kind of elsewhere at the moment, and to what degree I'm not. And I think I've established through thinking about it that whereas when I was in a 9 to 5, then I was much more in a place of like a low level distraction or a low level being elsewhere. Now I kind of feel like I'm actually in I'm actually in the extremes more. So I'm very much more invested in my plan making at the moment, because I'm trying to plan like what jobs I'm going to do, and there might be a bit of anxiety about getting work and all that kind of thing. And at the same time, I'm on the computer a lot less than I was when I was working in the job I was in before, which I think is conducive to being more present in general. Like I find screen time very difficult to be aware of my body, or just I get very sucked in to the screen. And I think also just I feel much more wholehearted about the work that I'm doing now, whereas before I felt a bit kind of half-hearted, or like I wasn't completely doing it either. So now I was in a semi-distracted state even about the work that I was doing. So it's a funny mix, like at the moment, where I'm very invested in the work I'm doing and I'm making a lot of plans, and I'm more focused and I'm more present in some other ways. So it's a funny mix at the moment. For the first time, I think, ever, I woke up last week and my jaw was really clenched when I woke up, and I'd realized that like in the night I had been like clenching my jaw out of, I think because I had worked all day and then worked like till about 10 at night. I was like so like revved up that I had got into this state where I was just like I was like clenching my teeth in my dreams and stuff, and like my jaw was like really aching. And that's definitely a first for me. So that shows sometimes what the degree of like of planning mode, or like thinking in that kind of way is at the moment. Yeah.
And what do you think is meant in this quote when they say life is what happens? Like what do you think that means in the context of this quote?
I think it's presence. I think it's like being in direct experience with, I mean, the thinking mind is only a small part of what it means to be alive. So I think making other plans is the thinking mind, the planning mind, the future oriented mind, which is such a small part really of what it means to be alive. You know, we've got all of our sense input and connections with people and the richness of life, which isn't in that plan making. So I think it's in a way life is referring to all the other experience that we can have that is available to us through our senses and through other people that is outside of that solely like thought-based reality.
Yeah, so that's kind of the same lines that I was thinking on, of life is kind of I think of it as the making of the plans is the fantasy, and then it's confronted with the reality of life. So you have kind of the juxtaposition between these two things. You've got your, how you can just get into making plans about how you want things to be, how you want your life to work out. And plans can be used in a more broad sense of just thoughts about the future and things you want to do. It doesn't have to be like very specific plan making, obviously. But when you've got these ideas of how things are going to go and what you want to happen, what you're going to say to someone, what's going to happen when you go to a different place, that is just always confronted with the reality of what actually happens and the reality of unexpected events coming out and completely changing your priorities and your plans. So I think it's a really nice quote that kind of shows the connection between these two things and how easy it is to get distracted in the planning mode and not realize that is not life. That is something extra, or like that's a kind of an abstraction that's built on top of your life, and you're creating ideas about how you think things are going to be. That always there is just this ever-present sort of life force and reality that just will check you or will check these plans. And ultimately, life is what is going to happen, regardless of what your plans are. Sometimes they can be aligned, but whatever happens, life is going to happen.
And I was listening to Eckhart Tolle, who's got a new podcast. I was listening to that the other day, and the point that never gets old, it's always fresh, this point of you've never actually encountered the future. There's never an experience of the future. That's never ever happened. It's as real as a conceptual idea of something. Like that's the bizarre thing. As accurately as you feel that you're predicting the future, which is probably not particularly accurate anyway, it's always still a concept. And it's mad to think that we're playing a game of, we might as well be using a crystal ball, like just literally like making it up. Like we've seen certain patterns and we're just trying to make up what may happen in a purely conceptual sense. And it's like, but no one has ever actually arrived there in this future place, in the place that we're making plans for. It's never manifested. It's never been arrived to. It's only now. It's literally, we've only ever been in the present moment. And it's just bizarre to think. So it's like, plan making, it's a huge, for a lot of us, it's probably a majority of our experience of being alive is thinking about the future, is thinking about being elsewhere. Like that can be, I don't know what percentage, but it would definitely be over 50%, I think, of just imagining what's going to happen next. And all of that is fictitious. It's all preemptive ideas about what could happen, much of which is inaccurate. And I think it's just great to be reminded of that and be like, oh yeah, I've got an idea about this evening or after we record, but that's not real. It's not a real thing. I'm not like conjuring an actual reality there. Like it's literally just like I've seen certain patterns and I'm just imagining something. But that is as far as it goes. Is a thought. The future is the plans, and the future. That's it. It's just a thought.
Yeah. And that's kind of the whole idea behind science, is that you you test things in order to predict the future, in order to be able to tell what is going to happen next in the next moment. And my friend Andy actually did his PhD on this subject of how you can't tell what the future is going to be based on the past. And it's just so true. You know, you can say like, oh yeah, this has happened lots in the past, but or at least, you know, at least based on the data you have, it seems like this has happened lots in the past. Because again, the past is another abstraction that only exists, you know, in terms of concepts that you conjure up in the present moment. But you kind of have these ideas of how things are and how things are probably going to be in the future, just because you think that they're going to be consistent with what has happened before. But yeah, you really don't know. You really don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And we, you know, and we seem to be getting more accurate at predicting things, not on an individual basis, but just as more and more data is consumed and like held onto, then it seems like we're being able to predict things better. But even if that's true, I think that the interesting point is that it's still always only a concept. You know, it's not ever arrived at in the way, you know, we've never actually arrived at a plan or arrived at a future moment. We've only ever been where we are, you know, and so that, you know, that's just a bit of a head fuck, really. I remember like lying down on my sofa. This was like I must have been about 17 or something, and having this epiphany for the first time. I can remember it really clearly, and lying down on the sofa and of course reading Eckhart Tolle, such a fanboy. And I remember just lying there and just like really comprehending that the future is a concept, and just being like, what the fuck? Like, there's been so much emphasis on, I've so assumed this to be something very real and tangible and solid, reliable. And in a way, like I segment my life into past, present and future, like they're sort of equal chunks of matter, of something solid. You know, like these kind of, that happened in the past, this is happening now, that's happening in the future. Like they were made of the same stuff. And realizing like, no, it's not made of the same stuff at all. Like it is an idea that I have that something may happen. And I think I might have actually mentioned it to my mum, and she obviously just looked very kind of confused by what I was saying, you know, just like, okay, you know, yeah, okay.
Cool,
I mean,
story,
like
bro.
like it's true. No one's going to be, I mean, people may argue a different point, but it's like, when you really get down to it, if you go long enough, then people will be like, okay, yeah, fine, but, and what kind of thing? I think the real recognition of it will be quite a visceral, it's going to have you're going to respond in your body in some way. It's not just like, oh, that's an interesting point. Like, because of how much time I spend elsewhere, you know, like making plans, doing something else, imagining some other moment, like that's a huge part of my life. To realize that is fictitious is like, what? You know, like I've relied on this. It's like the reflection on self and things like that. You know, it's like, I've so assumed this to be real, and now it seems very, you know, unreal or not what I thought it was anyway.
I think there's another interesting way to look at the quote of like, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. As we were saying, it's always the present moment. You're always experiencing life. So it's almost that while you think you're making other plans, that is still life. Like that is still there. You're making those plans in the same space of life, even if there's not the recognition of this is me living my life in the present moment. But you are still in the present moment. You're just not aware and conscious of the fact that you're in the present moment. But you're in this moment of life making other plans. So it's kind of like seeing through that delusion of while you think you're somewhere else, while you think you're in the past or in the future or in these other things, you're still in the present while that's going on. life is the constant space where that is arising.
So you might feel that you are, in a way, escaping your present experience. If you're imagining this amazing holiday or something like that, and you kind of feel like you may even be elsewhere. In fact, like it's so clear, this imagined reality, that it really does feel like you're elsewhere, but actually that's all being held in what is part of this present experience of just experiencing thought, and that being very absorbing and very all pervasive, but still it is happening. It's still happening now.
And that is not like, it's an amazing thing that we have our imagination and we can be within the present moment, imagining some other environment around us, the nature of it, and that you're not actually anywhere else. It's just, through your thoughts, and that has changed your experience of the present moment that you're having right now.
Yeah, it is quite amazing how powerful the mind is, really.
How much you can change the present.
Yeah, how convincing it is, how convincing the reality is that we create. And I guess particularly when you do snap back into the present moment for whatever reason, you're like, oh, right, I was completely somewhere else there. And like how vastly different it feels to be lost in thought and then to actually come back to the full kind of lived reality, really. I was wondering, from like your experience, what it is that when you're making plans, when you are elsewhere, what space you most often find yourself in? Like what is the reality that you kind of tend to end up in?
Well, I remember actually when I was on mushrooms having a realization that I spend a lot of my time concerned. Like that's like a common emotion that I can often return to. So I think that's kind of the flavor of it, is a concern. And it's usually about what's going to happen next, what I should do. Are there any threats in the environment? Just analyzing those things of, essentially it's, if you really boil it down to its roots in evolutionary biology, it's essentially like analyzing for threats, analyzing the environment for any threats or dangers or things to look out for. And that's a state that I slip into quite naturally, it seems. So yeah, rather than a particular area of thought, I would say it's that's kind of the flavor of it, of something that I can get drawn into, and something that also is often not a very enjoyable experience, even though it can be very useful. It's just good to be able to have the awareness of when it's useful and when it's not, and be able to kind of realize if I'm being too caught up in that mindset and just take a step back from it. But that's something that I definitely notice myself slip into. And although it definitely does have a lot of value, both in history, just that ability to assess the environment for threats or whatever it is, it's still very useful today in plenty of situations. So yeah, it's not like it's something that I think is right to just completely get rid of. Like it's still a useful mode of being to go into. But what I've been trying to do is just be more aware of that and use it at the appropriate times when it's going to actually benefit me, and not just do it in a compulsive way.
So is it like fixing or problem solving mode?
Maybe not fixing. I'd say more like mitigation. So like thinking of things that could go wrong and how to prevent them from going wrong. So it's not so much like, here's a problem that I need to solve, which I find a more enjoyable process in general. But it's more like, which things could go wrong? How can I make sure they don't go wrong?
I can relate to that. I think it as something that's very subtle, like it's a very kind of low level, like simmering or like kind of background static that's there as all right, just there needs to be an awareness because that keeps me safe kind of thing going on like a lot of the time. And I really relate to that. And I think I notice it most when it stops for a short period. and I'm like, all right, it's kind of, it's comparable to like wearing a really heavy backpack or something, or carrying something around and then putting it down and being like, oh, I feel totally different without that on. No, it's really interesting to hear like that's quite a common experience. I think for a lot, I think that's definitely one of those things that it's going to be in an altered state, whether through drugs or meditation or something like that, that you kind of clock that's like, oh, this is just a pretty standard setting. Because it's so all pervasive. It's kind of like if you're constantly tired, it's just like you have a good night's sleep and you're like, oh my god, I'm always tired. Like I'm just always tired. One thing that I've noticed in myself in relation to this, in the mode that I end up in, and I think this is a little bit higher, so a higher level, so less of a very background thing, but more of the sort of area I end up in a lot in my thinking, is project planning. That was one of the things I noticed a lot in meditation, is that my predominant I've got a magnetic pull towards idea generating and project planning. Like it's really interesting because I think that does vary from person to person a lot. I know people that very much get into a kind of worrying mindset, and that really dominates a lot of their day, is just being worried that they've said something bad or whatever it might be. I think for me, I like really just through meditation anyway, I've noticed that I'm just always thinking of ideas and coming up with new projects and things like that, which is kind of great on one level, and on another level it's like it's a bit of a compulsion. I think the root of that is somewhat a joyous creative urge, just like a movement, which is great. And then another part of it, I think, is that I haven't thought about it enough, but it's something probably along the lines of that I gain a lot of my sense of approval or validation through projects and art and doing things and showing off basically. And so I'm trying to constantly come up with ways of doing that will be effective. Like how can I do something special? How can I do something that will really get people's attention or whatever it might be? So it's definitely like a blend of those two things that I end up in a lot of the time, actually.
I definitely have a very similar thing.
We talked about before both me and Georgia, very we love making plans. We love our ideas and our projects, and I do think there's something very innocent about it as well. It's just like we both just love getting stuck into things and trying to come up with solutions to things, and that's really fun. Like I get a lot of my pleasure in life from doing that. So
me too. So the quote that I've got for next week actually ties into what we're talking about. It popped into my head as I was mulling over this quote, and it's from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and it goes as follows: "A confusion of the real with the ideal never goes unpunished."
Cool. Was that not one of the first ones?
No, I might have mentioned it before, but
I think you've definitely mentioned it to me before as a quote. We might not have
I think I've just mentioned the quote because I really like it.
Okay.
So we're gonna have to start watching out for that. We'll be like in year 10 trying to be like, shit, did we do this before?
Yeah.
But if you guys have got any thoughts about this quote and any things that you think we should mention on the episode, then you can send us a DM on Instagram, which is knowwhatimean.podcast. And you can also send us an email, which is linked down in the description. And if you enjoyed the podcast, then share it with someone else that you think would enjoy this sort of conversation, and just spread these conversations more in the world. So that would be awesome. And if you fancy it, you can buy us a coffee. We've got a link down in the description if you want to do that. So thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. Peace.